Hi. Thank you for waiting with us. There'll be more people coming in. That's just the thing on a day of innovation when sometimes panel after panel runs a little later and there's food in between, which is challenging as well. We designed it as food on the way, but of course people stop by and chat, which is what we want. And I'll explain later why it's so great having so many of you here and also such a diverse audience. My name's Peter Schniering. I'm the founder of Future Clean Tech Architects, and I have a very exciting group of experts here today, and we'll be speaking about R&D priorities and why this is important for the energy transition. Because after all, resources are limited. Even if a lot of attention is dedicated to climate technologies and sustainable technologies right now, there's the German saying, you can only turn around the euro once, so you can only spend each dollar once. And it's important what it's been spent on, and as we will see, there's some technologies that are neglected in a way. So, I would like to briefly introduce the panel, show 2 or 3 slides, we have this small TV over there, just on why it's so important that we prioritize research and the work we're doing correctly, and then I'd like to discuss with these experts. I'm starting over on the left from your side, which is Carsten Gerhardt, who agreed to come. He is a very prominent figure in the circular economy movement way beyond Germany. He is extremely popular in this region because he's done so much good for the city of Wuppertal, including the foundation. He's the founder of Circular Valley. He's a partner with Kearney, the advisory company, and he's doing a lot of other incredible things, and you might say more on this later. Carsten, thank you very much for being with us. Next to Carsten is Matthias Zelinger, who is running the Energy and Climate Division. Is that the right term to phrase it?
Yeah, formerly the Competence Center.
Competence Center of VDMA. VDMA is the largest German industry association responsible for the machine tool makers and a lot of other industries which are extremely important for getting the energy transition done in the end. And this sword has 2 sides. One is, and you can challenge this afterwards, but we've been discussing it yesterday pretty controversially at the evening reception. One is there's all these business opportunities out there in this association. There's companies which have incredible potential growing. On the other hand, of course, there's companies that have a lot to lose right now. And so my impression is the association is a little torn at the moment. I was speaking with Brussels policymakers, or Brussels people working in the Brussels policy space last night, and they said, on the one hand, it's so progressive. On the other hand, they're defending the internal combustion engine with claws of fists. So that's interesting, and I appreciate very much you've come. Next to Matthias is Dr. Hinrich Thoelken, who is ambassador at the German Federal Foreign Office and BMW Foundation's Futurity Fellow. And in the Responsible Leaders program, he's the special advisor on international climate and energy policy at the Auswärtiges Amt, the German Foreign Office. He has an incredible vita, and he just told me, look, I can't really say something on R&D, I don't know my way around, I don't trust him. I introduced him to somebody, Andrea from United Nations, and he just started speaking Italian fluently, of course, probably a lot of other, not as good as you can. And next to me, now that's like the most popular person probably up until now by the media on the festival. It's Anouk Kendall, president of Decentralised Energy Canada. She jumped in this morning for a panel already. We had journalist interviews all over the place saying, okay, where's Anouk? Can we speak Anouk again? But besides this quality, of course, in key, she knows. She is the president of Decentralised Energy Canada, which is highly important because energy, you mentioned it this morning, and also the province you're coming from is an oil and gas country. It's a fossil fuels producing country. And you're sort of working with all these stakeholders on getting the right technologies ready and getting all of that transition going with, again, a lot of stakeholders that have a lot to lose. People from this region, the Western state, this is the industrial heartland of Germany might remember the infighting when it comes to the compromise on coal, the exit from coal. I mean, if you drive east of Aachen, or west of Cologne through these areas, there's a lot of opposition against the energy transition, or has been, by unions. Unions are fighting against the close down of coal. Okay, that being said, and before opening the discussion, I would like to just show 2 or 3 slides. So if I think Marie, who's doing an excellent job here today, would be so kind. When it comes to priorities on R&D, I hope you can see that. I have a presenter, right. Thank you. I forgot. Okay. So let's see if that works. We've shown it in the opening ceremony. R&D is absolutely essential to driving down the cost of any sustainable technology, and after a long time usually enabling its significant adoption, so its rollout in the market. This is what you've seen is from the first real invention of the practical solar photovoltaic cell back in 1952 to the significant deployment of solar PV capacity sometime in the late 2000s. And this is a simplified version. We have this graph created, our analysts created this with all the intermediate steps, all the R&D programs, the deployment programs, and so forth. And I've been in a discussion, I've just recently heard in a discussion again that how much what global effect the German renewables feed-in tariff has had, basically. It has had little effect, a mitigation effect for German emissions when you compare them to worldwide emissions, but the effect it can have on driving down global emissions is just massive, because Germany helped at the cost of a lot of, not taxpayers only, but especially those who pay their electricity bills, but it helped drive down the cost massively. One more slide that might, when it's coming, okay. Sorry, did I skip one? Oh, that was right, sorry. So, in prioritizing R&D, why are we saying that? We cannot afford to work on anything but the most important solutions. In the graph on the left side, you're seeing simplified, of course, very simplified, but according to the impact they might have, and there's always various pathways in going that, on the climate damage that might be avoided through the technologies. And if a technology is on a very good path and the costs are down already, it does not make sense, or the extra dollar spent, it's always about spending the extra R&D dollar or euro or whatever on a certain technology. And the question is always, what kind of additionality effect can it have to drive down emissions? We as FCA and many of our partners don't look at German emissions, but we always look at the global impact, of course, because that's what counts for when you prioritize R&D. And finally, one last slide. If this moves, it doesn't. Can you? There's a lot of uncertainty when we develop, and on this festival we especially target the hard to abate sectors, cement, in certain parts steel, aviation. We just had the aviation panel over at the Central Library, or long duration energy storage. And there, the story is unclear. So we'll have to see what happens until 2050. We just had a discussion with founders from synthetic kerosenes or technologies for e-fuels in aviation. We don't know about many of the effects. We don't know what we have to adapt. So we need to make sure funding is attributed now, and it's attributed on various options. We can't choose the first option sort of too quickly. And with this, I will just, final thought, we need some insurance effects. So we need to insure against certain pathways if something goes wrong on the way. We cannot rely on current predictions of technology development and temperature development completely. So when we talk about extra dollars that are being spent, it is pretty important that we take these things into consideration and attribute them accordingly. Okay. With this, I would like to start the discussion. And I would like to point the first question to the man who said he does not know anything about it. And I would like to ask Hinrich, I mean, after all, you're advising, for those who don't know this, who are not from Germany, the competence for the international climate negotiations has moved sort of the ministry from the Ministry of the Economy to the from the Ministry of the Environment, that's what I was going to say, to where it has been for a long time, to the Foreign Office. Now, in your daily work, when you advise, when you develop these concepts and so forth, what kind of role does not R&D as specific, you know, we will do this on electrolysis and hydrogen, but the general guidelines of the German role in international politics, what kind of role does technology play? Where does it turn up, and what's your view on this, given what I just tried to summarize?
Well, you summarized it so well. I mean, my daily work focuses very much on the question of energy supply. Where do we get our energy from? And certainly after 24th of February, the question has increased in urgency. This is a difficult task, and you might have seen in the newspapers that the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action just increased the warning level for our gas supply from level 1 to level 2. We have 3 levels exactly. So this is where we are, and we look around where do we get the stuff from to heat our homes, especially next winter and the winter 23-24. This is the challenge. Afterwards, I think we are fine. On the one hand, it's a question of political, let's say, networking, buying, replacing shipments and so on. But of course, there's also technology involved. And technology comes into the game, not so much in the gas business, because this is fairly straightforward. We know what we do. But when we talk about replacing gas with other molecules, namely hydrogen. Hydrogen is a very interesting, attractive, I should say, gas, material, energy source, because it can play a large role, for example, in steel making, and one of the neglected sectors you mentioned, but also possibly in many other sectors. But we just have to make sure that we get the stuff from renewable sources, the so-called green hydrogen, and then we must make sure that we can actually ship it to Germany or to Europe where it's needed dearly. And there are a lot of technical, technological, logistical questions to be solved, because you cannot just put hydrogen in a normal tanker. It doesn't work like this. There's a certain loss. You need to cool it down much more than liquefied natural gas. So there are many aspects involved, and we are betting on the future, on technological development that will, on the one hand, make solutions possible, on the other hand, make solutions economical. So this is where we need to go into the field. This is why the German government is investing heavily in pilot projects, be it in Australia, in Chile, in Morocco, in other places, just to get a feeling where can it work, how does it work, and how can it help us to meet our energy needs, not only in the next 2 years, but in the long run, because basically we want to get out of all fossil fuels, including gas. So we do not want to conclude contracts that bind us for 20 years, but for shorter time spans, and then to replace it successively with hydrogen inter alia. But hydrogen is one of the main topics where we need technology, certainly.
And this is, you mentioned a good word, which is piloting, of course. You've mentioned the investments into several pilots, and then see what works and what doesn't, which is a good approach. By the way, our team will hand out fact sheets to you later. Some of you have seen them already, on topics like hydrogen, topics like cement. Because first of all, I guess the challenge is also in your and your colleagues' daily work, is get, of course, overview on the available technologies, because this space is developing so quickly. So many entrepreneurs coming up. By the way, we've got entrepreneurs for carbon capture and storage technologies, direct air capture in the room from a German university. I will come back to that later. Synfuels and other things. But so first of all, one needs to get an overview and then prioritize. And the space is shifting quickly. And with this, I would like to ask Matthias, within the VDMA, which is, we have a family company here in engineering. It's also in VDMA for a long time. It's a conservative, large German organization, and still you're trying to adapt. You're trying to get this change in and also support the startup ecosystem. What's your radar on this scope? What's happening in all of the important innovators that are working out there, and how do you prioritize your activities? Because you have different levels of supporting them, supporting the R&D that's conducted by these people in the development.
So just one word before, we are about 3,500 companies
from the engineering sector. So you can buy everything from a paper mill to the classical machinery, tooling machinery, up to the windmill and so. And therefore, and finally, we are an association. We have to be honest, we are an association, so we are for our members. And there are members which have products which are linked, as an example, to the internal combustion engine, to speak it out. And we have those who are producing the windmills, the electrolyzers, and all these nice things. And therefore, we are trying to balance between finding the framework for tomorrow's products and, on the other hand, to organizing the transition of our industry as well. As an example, I was responsible for 5 years for the power generation sector, and when I started, we had about 25,000 people here in Germany active in the field of coal-fired power plants. Today, we are very close to zero, and on the other hand, we have ramped up the wind industry especially, and now all the new technologies. So this is something where you have to find the right speed, and this combined with the speed outside. So when we see what we have seen in tremendous changes in the last years, especially since Paris, I think this is really something where you have to push an industry and where you have to make very clear that the markets are changing dramatically. And when you speak about circular economies, that's one of the next big things on the one hand, but it is very close combined with the climate change challenge. And this is what we're trying to, on the one hand, to explain, but to understand together. And this is the core point of the discussion. We are discussing how we can bring technological ideas to market. And in the meanwhile, I have learned, or I was long time discussing only about R&D. In the meanwhile, we have to speak about RD&D, which means deployment. Because things are moving so rapidly that not everything is really caused by the market. So this deployment effect here, we need so much speed that we have to go into organizing deployment of technologies. And what we can offer as an association to the politics, to the framework makers, is to explain what is first, what is the technology readiness, and secondly, what is the economical potential. Where do we see the markets? And this means always worldwide. The German engineering industry has an export share of about 80%. So we are not speaking about Germany again.
So how do you...
There is no German technology.
Sorry, second question on that. How do you exchange, how do you communicate these findings into the, say, policy-making space? So how can we ensure that what you come up with, which is pretty practice-oriented, just as Carsten's work we'll hear later about, but so how do you ensure this information, which is very valuable, makes it to decision makers?
First, and I think this is something which has completely changed in the last years, even our politics in Germany and in Europe are much more orientated to the economical factors. So they know that we need business models. And this is something which brings us directly in the discussion. So there is an open ear in the meanwhile. It wasn't so 10 years ago, sorry for that. But this is really important because all these technologies have a competitiveness question between the different economical areas. So first, in the meanwhile, there is an open-minded policy space. Secondly, it's our job to transform these technological messages into, I would say, political proposals. So to a certain part, we are a lobbying organization, to say it very clear. But this is nothing negative. And third, and this is something, we are very active in a network with our customer industries and all this, because the question of economics of a product isn't decided only by the costs, it's also decided by the competitiveness of the product in relation to other things. And when we speak about hydrogen, this is one of the classical questions. And even with this engine question, just give me one sentence for this. It's true that we have clearly stated that completely phase out in the internal combustion engines would be a mistake. But no one has said that, especially for the small passenger cars, that electric is clearly the best solution in the moment. But first thing, sometimes you need a plan B. As we see today with our gas supply, it would have been good to have a plan B. We haven't it, so he has a lot of work in the moment. And secondly, we have to be careful what is the effect over all applications. Today, the drivers of all these engine questions are the automotive industry. And there are many others who need combustion processes. And this is something where we only are clearly stating we need a transformation, and we need to organize it in a way that we have, where we need it, that we still have it. So this is this point. So organizing transformation is one of our core things in the moment.
Understood, thank you. I think that the whole, I mean, especially in Germany, those people living in Germany know that the internal combustion engine is something emotional. It's something for the heart. We've sort of invented it. And
together with the Italians.
Sure, I mean, co-invented it in the general perception. And I think that the thing that makes people working on climate effectiveness and climate measures so afraid is always this, when for example, in the coalition negotiations last fall, the Liberals thought of this e-fuels quota for passenger cars, where everybody was just shaking, who knew the maths behind it. And so that's why, of course, there's different interests to be brought into a compromise. Thank you. So you would say, just nod your head or shake it, the discussion with the policymakers works better. So your findings, they're more open, they're more policy, more economic oriented, so this exchange works.
Yes, but there is still a tendency that some politicians are thinking they know things better, and they know better what is in 20 years. And there we still have a strong believing in the market as an innovation driver. Yeah?
Okay.
So this is, and this is one of the reasons why we have been one of the first associations, industry associations in Germany, which were lobbying for a very much higher CO2 price, because this is our core instrument.
Yeah.
We have clearly said we want to see above 100 euros and change the system of all these taxes, and so that bring it to the CO2 price. And this is finally something we are speaking about, the frameworks that you can drive innovation.
Thank you. I'll spare you as the last because you've been talking so much all day and so you can relax a little. Over to Carsten. Carsten, I have a question on evaluating the effectiveness of the technologies, which then leads to, or the potential of the technologies, which then leads to the allocation of R&D funding, basically, of also advising on R&D funding. With the two hats you're wearing, both advising, well, companies or public institutions with Kerne, and at the same time having built up Circular Valley, which is probably the most impressive circular economy organization in Europe. Yeah, you don't have to comment. So
I would hope worldwide.
Worldwide,
Silicon
yeah.
Valley,
So that's the right approach. Now, Carsten and I were at a sustainability startup panel the other day, and there were I was just part of the panel discussion, and we were still in the audience, and these companies pitched their technologies, and on the way out until the jury, Carsten was part of the jury, he asked me, "Hey Peter, what's your favorites?" And I said, I can't tell, and because some of the concepts seemed to me so out of the way and not within my core competence, something on water treatment, for example, who then won in the end? And I thought, well, that cannot be. And I told him something else. And then they awarded this prize to this water treatment company, which had run through, which I didn't know, which had run through the Circular Valley incubator process or evaluation process already. So how do you do it? There's so many companies you have in these, how do you call them, these groups or cohorts. How do you identify what has the biggest potential from a Circular Valley perspective? Because this is interesting for allocating R&D in general.
Peter, perhaps let me start with saying that there is so much that has been invented already, and innovation is good, and we need more innovation, definitely in the field of health or what have you, but I'm not sure we need that much more innovation, for example, in the field of renewable energy. When you showed the first slide, I recall that when I was a little boy, like 12 or 14, so in the early 80s, I had a Cosmos experimental kit. Some of the Germans may remember that. And there was a PV cell in it. It was a thin layer PV cell. That was 1980. And it worked super well. So it had been invented back then. So another question is, why did it take so long to scale up? I would say let's not overspend and overthink on which is better. If something is good and works and somebody is willing to take it to market, let them do it. So when we get applications for Circular Valley, and last round was close to 500 applications from all over the world, and many were similar. it's not that there is stuff which has never been seen or heard before. So there is those companies doing chemical recycling of plastic. Super. Yeah, the base technology is very similar. So if one technology is 3% more efficient or less efficient, we couldn't care less. If it works, and if it overall, from an energy standpoint, makes sense to use it, we say, just do it. So in the end, it will be the personality of the founders, which we are particularly interested in. Is it something they can take to market? Because in general, if you look at prices today, take the price of energy, electrical energy. We in our households, we pay something like 30 cents. So, no, and that's fine with everyone. So why should we care if it's produced for 3 cents or 4 cents or 5 cents? There is such a big gap between the production cost and the ultimate retail price. We should easily fit in any of the technologies. We can take the 3, the 4, the 5 cent technology. So I think that is what we should become more and more aware of, that if an innovation is above a certain threshold, then go for it and mandate it. Make it mandatory. So, I mean, let's talk about seat belts. Nobody wanted to have seat belts in the 80s, or the 70s, I don't know exactly when.
Non-smoking in public buildings. Yeah.
But it was mandated, and then it works. So mandate hydrogen in cars, mandate renewable energy. So yeah, I'm working, as you said, I'm working in the private sector, in the job that pays my bills. So I'm working in the impact sector, in the job that feeds my soul. But I would really say, go for it, make it mandatory, more regulation, as you said before, yeah. Introduce a price which is triple digit for carbon. Why not? Nobody cares in the end. So my main take to your question
has somebody noted these statements? Great, thank you, Carsten, thank you. Bold approach. There was spontaneous comment by Hinrich.
Yeah, let me just add one aspect. I think you're absolutely right if we work on the assumption this is a rational world. But let me make one statement here. I had a talk yesterday. We talked about the comparison between fossil fuels, fossil energies, and renewable energies. And my feeling is, and I'm not the only one that has this feeling, that there's something irrational when it comes to fossil fuels. If a country discovers a huge oil field in the exclusive economic zone or a gas field or whatever, everybody sees this as a pile of cash that needs to be exploited and spent. If you say, well, you have a wonderful desert here, it's suitable for solar energy, they would say, it's not cash, I have to invest, I need technology, and then they start bickering and reckoning. It's completely irrational, but we have to factor this in. So a 3% advantage might not be much, but sometimes it helps to swing the balance in the direction it should go. We are fighting this fight with the irrational belief that fossil fuel is cash, and renewable energy is complicated, and this is not going away.
Thank you, Hinrich. And that's and now's a cliffhanger. Before I give my opposing statement to Carsten, where I disagree, I would like to hand it over to Anouk, because that was just the perfect introduction by Hinrich, of course. You're in the country that has grown so wealthy, basically, in part on fossil fuels, but you're running an organization that wants to support decentralized renewables across Canada.
Right.
How do you solve that puzzle?
Well, okay, don't give another thing into my head. I have so much going through my head right now from that conversation, and I love the idea that you talk about mandating. Like, we have to. There is no other alternative. What are we willing to tolerate as a society, and what are we not willing to tolerate? And that should be forming new regulations around how and actually I would even go further than let all flowers bloom is what used to be the saying. Let all technology, it doesn't matter what the technology is. If they've got an idea, they've got a business plan, they've got a leader, and they can come to you and they can raise money and they can sell it, let them do it, right? I do agree with that, but I don't agree with the mandating the hydrogen, and I know that's where you're going to. I think your metrics still have to be, does your vehicle meet these emission standards? Does it have the circular end-of-life recyclement, reuse? Do you have these characteristics of this product? If so, go ahead. I don't care if it's run on helium. I don't care if it's run on cow poop. Like, do whatever you can do that doesn't bring out particulates, emissions, ends up with a stranded asset at the end of 10 years, or God forbid, you know, a phone that lasts for 1 year, and then you change your phone and you need a new charger, you need a new this, you need it. Like, that should be illegal. And packaging, it should be illegal. Like, you can't have a little thing like this in a package like this that comes in a box like this that's wrapped in plastic with a bow on it. I mean, these things should not be allowed to happen. So I've got that rolling through my head. Then I've got this, I was listening to what you were saying, and I was thinking, I didn't really, and maybe I missed it, I didn't really hear there anything about make sure we're utilizing our local resources. So I thought where you were going to go when you said we've just discovered oil and gas in our country, and this might be contentious, but in Alberta, I do think we need to have the life cycle analysis conversation of what, I don't think there's any papers out there that have credible backup and evidence that says it is worse sustainably, like sustainability-wise, worse emissions for Alberta to extract gas and to put it through trigeneration, so combined heat and power and cooling, versus building, you know, megawatts of solar farms on agricultural or wildlife habitat corridor, bring in batteries using lithium and vanadium, which, by the way, we are looking at the circular economy in Alberta for lithium and vanadium from oil and gas waste. But I still think, and you know, and so it goes to my number one thing, which I think a lot of us have talked about, is access to information. And I think the industry associations play a pivotal role because we're neutral, we have access to the conversations that a lot of people don't, we're extremely collaborative, we have our finger on the pulse for what's coming down the pipeline. And I do, somebody way back was saying it's, you know, the government, I had a conversation in Calgary, and I said this once before already over the past 2 days, but just before I left, I had a conversation with a senior government official who's running our clean electricity standard. And I said, we're here to help you, let us help find some new technologies, find some new information. You need the information. He says, well, technologies are never going to be invested in. You know, nobody wants to invest in energy storage, and nobody wants to invest in electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And I just kind of sat there and I went, I'm not sure who you've been talking to. Because if you'd asked me 5 years ago, yes, they weren't investing. But at our investor forum on May 31st, every single investor in that room stood up and said, we are begging to have a play in something because everything comes to us oversubscribed. We've got Series A funding coming out of the yin-yang right now for our entrepreneurs. They're raising 11 million, 15 million, 250 million. Like, the investors are there, they're at the table. I think the technologies that go through incubators and accelerators are it's their market right now. But I do think, this is a lot, I'm sorry, but the point is access to this information is critical, because when I'm talking to a policy decision maker that doesn't know the difference between biogas and renewable natural gas, I think it's a critical thing if they're in charge of developing a clean electricity standard. And I will just say biogas can be blended with natural gas. Renewable natural gas can fully displace natural gas without compromising engines, without compromising pipelines. And if a federal decision maker in a clean electricity strategy doesn't understand that premise and is making decisions about biogas plants, it's a problem.
It is. Thank you for these things. I would like to take it back once more to the, now how do you identify the fields we want to go for? And I completely agree with what you and also Carsten said on the mandate. Mandate a lot, be ambitious on this. Sometimes maybe the general perception has to be convinced by just doing something. You were mentioning the seatbelts or the non-smoking laws and all these kinds of things. I sort of disagree on one thing, that is your solar cell in your Cosmos kit. Because when you had that solar cell in the kit, PV, photovoltaics, was so prohibitively expensive. You could never have installed it anywhere and gotten significant amounts of electricity from it, but it had to reach this point, which we've seen on this one slide, where at some point it could have been supported by something like the EEG, the German Renewables Feed-in Tariff or so, which was completely ambitious, and it had a lot of flaws as well, particularly it wasn't adapted quickly enough and, you know, too slow. But it helped, together with a couple of Chinese policies, it helped to drive the cost down so far that suddenly this has become a major player in the market. And that's just what I would like to, no criticism at all, but it's a cool example. But this is what I would like to open the round on. Please feel free to respond, whoever wants. Because what Carsten was referring to is mainly deployment of existing technologies, which is great. We have a lot of the technologies we need, but we have some we don't. We don't have low carbon cement, really. Nothing that can replace this building material right now. We don't have a solution for aviation. Not really, nothing we could scale out, even with a lot of money. And you have one, yeah, thank you. Just direct air capture isn't going to solve it, by the way, not aviation. And so, question to the whole round, feel free to reply whoever wants to. How do we identify those fields? And I'd like to draw your attention to the neglected fields of technology, those where we don't have the solutions yet. What's the best way to go about it? Because you all have you have lots of expertise in working, especially on these kinds of techs and bringing them forward.
So first, I would say there is a difference if you make a technology mandatory or if you make its performance a standard. And there is, I would fully agree if you say there is a technology which is bringing down emissions by 40%, yeah? Making it mandatory to say, at least in 2, 4 or 5 years, this is the standard what we want to see, and to keep it open that other technologies step in. I think this is one of the core questions, because then you have a competition, and when we see there was a competition between different renewable technologies, and finally bringing down the cost was also a question not only of the market size, and that's one point. Second point, even if you only have a technology vision, there might be a chance to start with setting some standards or especially quotas for the future. And this is something where we start now with aviation, yeah, that we are starting to have a quota for renewable fuels in fuels for aviation. If it comes, no one knows. Maybe you need a plan B sometimes, yeah. But this is a very important tool. And personally, even if our industry was very keen to get the EEGs, or this was this funding scheme, or a feed-in tariff here in Germany, personally, I'm not sure if a quota for renewable energy for the suppliers, for the utilities, saying at this year 5%, 10%, 100%. Personally, I believe we could be in electricity by 80% today without any problems if we have started early enough. So, first this. Secondly, if we are going this route, then we will see technologies coming up and saying, hey, I have the potential and proven this, but I need some help in R&D, I need some risk sharing especially. And finally, my impression is today, beside of the startup scene, which really needs clear funding and financing, the others are needing risk sharing finally. And this is the important thing. And here we can step in as a public funding, where we are saying, okay, we are supporting to a certain extent, then you have to prove that you are market ready, and then there can be a push for the market uptake as well, but this is core. And I think this is a critical point where you come up, where we have a research phase, and research is not always, but a lot of research, the basic phase is public funded, that's fine, and the universities are doing a great job. They are doing a great job in the meanwhile, from my perspective, to bring it in a startup world where some people like you can take up. But finally, it's all about the question: how can we identify this? And when you have a certain technology readiness level, you can prove, or not only not prove, but given a clear picture how your market perspective is. And these are the ones who help. And our problem in Germany especially is in the moment for funding, often our orientation is a German market, the German Energiewende, and we have to focus much more on the world market and on collaborations around the world. The potential that others are taking up that we can have the capacities on other world markets to take it up. And this is one of the core questions which is underrated until today.
Thank you, Matthias. Other opinions on this? What does it take, Carsten?
Peter, maybe just a point. So I wouldn't care that much about cost. I'm more caring about energy payback. if I have a technology where I need to invest, say, 1 unit of energy and it generates this unit back in a year or half a year or 2 years, so in a foreseeable time span, that is completely fine for me. And then I say, go for all and make them mandatory. I would not say everything on electric, everything on hydrogen, but give a little portion to everything. Yeah. I mean, there's Olympic Games in 100 disciplines. Why? Yeah. Because we can afford it. We can afford to have people who run, who jump, who swim. Yeah, so we are living on a planet of plenty, and we are not using that plenty. We're tending to go so much into one direction. So I would say, as long as it doesn't harm the planet, to set onto one technology, include it into the basket, and then if everybody gets a little bit of funding, so then we will see which turns out most popular, which grows the fastest. I think I'm more coming from that direction. But my important point is let's not so much care about cost, because the time of money and cost seems to be over anyhow pretty soon if we look at the financial markets. If an alien came on our planet and wouldn't have the notion of money, they would say, hey, guys, what are you doing? You have fantastic technologies, you have great challenges, you have enough people to do something, because honestly, how many people are truly working? 5%? Maybe less, yeah? The rest is organizing and thinking and doing. So put some money, put some people into it, use the technology, use the resources, use it wisely, and rebuild this planet.
Carsten, I'm looking around because somebody from the FCA team is always taking the notes, and it's like recording. And for the key takeaways, so we have this, we have the pilots. Anouk, you want to say something? Thank you for this compassionate.
Super quick one. You're giving the thing we're not saying there is you're giving people options again. And I think you used the word technological lock-in, which, the keyboard QWERTY and stuff. I hadn't heard that before. And then I started thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, we need to give people options again, because we're not thinking about the consequences of our actions. So once you say to them, look, all of these technologies in your household for producing cement, for manufacturing a saw, all of them meet the sustainability standards and the regulations. Choose what you want to choose. And then you start diversifying your economy and stopping that vulnerability of putting all your money into one technological innovation. I love what you're saying there, and I would just add in the optionality for people. It's been a long time since we've had options in terms of that.
Yeah, and do a proper life cycle assessment at the beginning, because otherwise you're ending up at ethanol, which even the Republicans by now have understood this was stupid, and they've known it for a while. Don't do that stuff, but anything which has a positive life cycle analysis, go for it. You can't go wrong.
Thank you both. Comment by Hinrich.
Just a very small objection to this. I mean, if we open up, let's say, the box of Pandora, say, let the people choose what kind of transport solution they would like to have, be it hydrogen, fuel cells, electric, fossil fuel. You can find other energy sources for mobility probably. We would end up with a rather complex and resource-intensive infrastructure. We shouldn't forget that. That's one thing. And the second point, just allow me one other point. Is,
also
this is talking about the mature economy, which has the potential to deal with innovation and with change and build up infrastructure. Let's think about the we. We talk about we have to do this and to do that, but I talked to somebody from Cyprus this week earlier. Cyprus is in a terrible situation. They have diesel power. They are not really connected to any kind of grid. There's no incentive to go into renewables. They're sitting on a large chunk of natural gas in the coastline. So how do they get from this seemingly stable situation to a renewable future? There's no thinkable, imaginable good way leading in this direction. I talked to people from Ethiopia 2 weeks ago. I was there. 60% of the population has no access to the grid. So if you then offer them a choice, you can go either this direction, that direction, it's complete confusion. They need cheap, scalable solutions that are proven. So we must make sure, the we is again the important factor, that in some instances we have to offer a standard solution that just does work and is really cost efficient. Not too much choice in that situation. But doing the right thing is very difficult here.
I think, and Carsten, you might respond briefly, but I think we're talking on different levels.
Yeah.
Some infrastructure,
Yeah.
some things, you have a lock-in whether you want it or not, because either you have a gas grid or you have something else. So this you cannot escape. I think Carsten and Anouk, as far as I understood you correctly, we're talking on a different level of more, not these infrastructure-intensive technologies, but rather other technologies. Is that right? Carsten, you wanted to say, or Anouk?
Yeah, I would say anything that has that is energy positive, you can do it. Yeah? So you would opt out of the diesel. It's like when I decide what I eat. So you can tell me, don't eat sugar, but I'm free if I want to do carrots or potatoes or whatever, and anything healthy. Yeah? So just move out of what's harming you and move into anything that is positive. So I agree. We would not want to have 100 technologies in parallel, but if COVID has shown us one thing, diversity is good. So yeah, how happy would we be if we were much more diversified in our energy system already today? So and ultimately, my point is we can afford it. We are not living on a planet of scarcity. We tend to forget that because I mean it's those basic figures. Sun is putting 10,000 times more energy onto the planet than we actually need. So we only need to convert such a small fraction. But we are still behaving like cavemen. And this is simply wrong. So seeing that we are living on this planet of plenty and only need to now jointly leverage the opportunities.
Matthias, we're asking for a short reply because we want to take one round of questions. And
I would agree from the Allianz perspective. So coming here, seeing the situation, but in reality, making things happen needs every day thousands of individual decisions of individuals, of companies, of economics, of politicals, of financing people. And I think this is where we have to finally to step in and to find the solution. And last word, one of the big research parts is, from my perspective, is really economics. Because we have not found a solution until today, really to value green behavior of companies, of societies in balance sheets finally. And this is one thing, besides the technology, which is really core, find a solution to value this behavior, find a solution to use the aliens as a solution. Then we have a much better basis for this.
Thank you. Here's a quick shout-in, as my younger team members would say. Not a reading recommendation, but a watching recommendation to what Carsten has just said and Matthias has touched upon. You might know the Israeli historian Yuval Harari, who wrote *Sapiens*, a short history of humankind. He just put out, I don't know when he put it out, I guess like a month ago, a TED Talk video on the aggregated cost to global GDP if we were to become climate neutral. So what would it cost? And they've done a meta study of all the analysis out there, and they come up, like the median is 2%. So it would cost 2% more. We would lose 2%. And he's arguing it wouldn't be total cost. It's investment. We would invest 2%. So you might get return on that. And put that into perspective, what Carsten had just said, on the alien landing, saying, guys, what are you doing here? Basically, given the talent that's there, the resources that's there, the ingenuity, the ideas that are out there. Okay. We need even, we started the session late, but I need to close it on time, 1 hour. So we need to be, I can't be longer than 15 minutes later than we initially thought. Are there questions from, there are many questions. Okay, whom are we going to start with? Andrea had the hand up first. I'll be the mic holder here, and then we've got Ben. My request would be short questions if you can, and we'll take 2 or 3.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very fantastic discussion. I'm Andrea from the Climate Change Secretariat. I really like that you ended up on people, and you also make reference to factoring irrationality into the process. So when it comes to people's, irrationality is its kingdom. So how you factor in that into the process? Because they are the end users. How you engage them in the development of technology process? Because I think it's important to really have a successful long-term uptake of technology at the end.
We'll take it one by one. Brief answer.
Okay, I don't have the answer for you, but I really think the solution is in the visualize it. And again, I keep using this example over and over. Did I just use it today? Have I talked about putting our garbage on the front step here?
You have.
No, I didn't? Okay.
You have. Not
today?
here, no, in the other
Not
panel.
here. So you tell everyone, and a woman from New Orleans came up and said, you have no idea what happened after the hurricane. We had garbage on the streets for 2 months. Instead of cleaning up their garbage, they waited for the government for 2 months to come and clean up their garbage. And she says, what do we do about that? And I said, I don't know. I really don't know. But you kind of hope if the government said to you, here's a shovel, you're going to bury your garbage in your backyard. Let's see how long it takes you to say, do I really need that plastic bag at the grocery store? Do I really need to take that trip? Do I really need to do this? Something's got to pinch people. And that's why the consequences, right? You've got to have consequences to this inconvenience. Many people don't understand where their garbage goes, when they flush their toilet, where it goes, how much of that goes back into your system, all the medication. Like, this circular economy premise is so fundamental to getting anywhere. It all comes around. What goes around comes around. He's giving me the shh. No.
No. Brief question by Ben, please. We've got Johannes and we got another question over there.
Sure, thank you. So I'm Ben, I'm from the UNFCCC's youth constituency. I wanted to touch upon path dependency and technological lock-in, going from the R&D side of things to deployment. So how do you avoid that whilst kind of not being paralysed and delaying the rollout of technologies? So 2 examples, electrifying heat too early. So for example, the Dutch chemical industry has expressed quite a lot of reservations about this. I think across Europe as well, that if they electrify heat too early, then that may have an impact on the ability to be able to use hydrogen and CCUS later down the line. Conversely, in the UK, we've been delaying our hydrogen strategy because we are not sure what's going on and we're sort of in this state of paralysis. So how do you balance those 2, I guess, competing objectives, one of which has a path dependency of dither and delay, one of which has a path dependency where you get locked in?
Well, if that was a short question, I'm not sure, but anyways, we're looking forward to the answer. Maybe pass the mic to Jan.
I think the very first thing is speaking about these path dependencies. And secondly, and this fits up with the question of infrastructures as well. And showing that we have to learn to make things a little bit more flexible. He has spoken about the LNG terminals in Germany. We are now speaking, is there a potential to make them hydrogen ready? Because we know in 5 years people are starting with big volumes of hydrogen. So this is something where we have to learn. Technologies has to become much more adaptable. This is a simple answer. There is not the one solution, but we have to be prepared that things are changing in the future. As one example, 3 years ago, we have run a study, Pathways to Climate Neutrality in German Industry, and there were 2 big things, CCS in steel, and secondly, transport, so truck transport with Oberleitung. The English word for Oberleitung? Electricity from a cable over the road, so like the train. 2 years later, we have done a revised study, and this time, all the steel players were speaking about hydrogen instead of CCS, and secondly, no one was speaking again about these electrified highways. They were all speaking about battery electric and hydrogen transport. So this shows, first, we have to keep the competition open, and secondly, we have to be adaptable.
And I would just add to that, 20 years ago, we had a presentation in our founding workshop from EPRI, Electricity Research Institute in California, and Stephen Gell was a presenter, and he stood up, and I'm just planting a seed here on bundling. You know, you bundle with your phones, you bundle with your utilities. This is what he was saying, bundling. There's actually some interesting, and this is a long time ago, I'm not saying it's a solution now, but he actually presented a technological solution for a pipeline that carries electricity, and I'm gonna get this all wrong, but the electricity is insulated by the hydrogen, and the hydrogen's insulated by the gas. Like there were three types of energy going through the pipeline, and he said it's not only feasible, it's smart because it adds that diversity. And I'm just putting, I know that's a little bit of a, but I'd still like to capture electricity from lightning.
Speaking about R&D, it's a
I know. That's true. Electricity, though, that's something we need to think. Do you know that 1 bolt of electricity can run New York for 20 years? Incredible.
Wow.
Somebody in here can solve that. You just need a really fast charger. Induction. Big belly, small mouth, or something like that.
Are you sure? Yes. With the figure? Okay. Anyways, next question over there.
Yeah, Johannes from Founders Pledge. So 99% of future emissions will come from places that none of you is representing, right? Or where none of you is located. So in a way, this is a bit more of a comment than a question, but I find this the answer for like how we're prioritizing. And I think the answer that you've given us, okay, we kind of give money to everything and we kind of see what is working where we are, seems extremely unsatisfactory given like future emissions are coming from sectors that are quite different from the economies that we're in and where our innovation capacity is located. So I kind of want to challenge you to give an answer kind of in the face of kind of global emissions and like the global situation a bit more.
Thank you.
I do have a comment on that. I'm finding, so we're working with Nigeria and the Caribbean, and they're leapfrogging. So we're actually the ones that are going to be far behind. So the work in Nigeria with mostly rural populations that are saying, how are we going to provide affordable and reliable and resilient access to electricity? I don't know, but I'm challenging back because the events and discussions we've been having, I'm like, oh my God, we're behind them. Like our technology developers are saying, I'm learning from them about how to protect the microgrid in that rural. And the investors are coming out of the woodwork in rural Nigeria and the Caribbean, and the insurance companies sure as heck are coming up to bat because they're losing infrastructure every year now.
Yeah, but rural Nigeria doesn't matter in terms of emissions, right? It's like industrializing emerging economies. Well, but not the rural kind of microgrid populations.
Hinrich?
Yes, you're right. I mean, the small projects, they will not really matter for the big sums. So for the big figures, that's why we have to talk about coal, really getting rid of this particular drug. And when we're at it, also throw in oil and gas. And then we have a large chunk of emissions dealt with. Do we get there quickly? No. Even in Glasgow, the last COP, 6 months ago, basically, in the last minute, I mean, basically it was China and India resisted any tougher language on coal. Why? Because there's a feeling they need it as a cheap fuel. And there comes the irrational factor again into the game. Yes, of course, it's cheap. But if you compare it to build new energy sources, even a coal-powered plant is much more expensive than renewables in India or in China. So this is the trick that we have to play with. And in a global level, we are in a prisoner's dilemma. Those who move first are afraid that they will lose out, so we all lose. And that's the problem.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Johannes, for pointing the attention to this. I think the potential that might even come from countries that only represent, if we spoke about it this morning when we had African cement producers or steel producers here, that if you take that, I think America and Europe represent about 15%, I'm not sure about the exact figure, 20%, of future emissions. Still a lot of the development work that can take place in these countries or of these countries with other countries together can mitigate a lot of the future emissions. So it's still worthwhile dedicating all these energies while prioritizing correctly, which is of course very important. Unfortunately, we've already exceeded the time limit. It's been a pleasure discussing with all you. I appreciate also the questions from the audience and all the interactions we've had over the past days. From here on, we'll look at some companies that really made it, that scale their technologies in the theater. So until here we had a dual track where there were 2 sessions in parallel. Now we really look at those companies that scaled. And I would like to encourage you to discuss a little, exchange details, but then walk over to Theater Theater where we have some cake waiting, hopefully, if all goes well. And we'll hear about 2 exciting last sessions, which is the launchpad, we call it, so companies that manage to scale. And then UNFCCC will take us on a trip, the road to Sharm el-Sheikh. So what can we expect from Egypt, from this year's climate conference, and what's to be done until here. Please join me in a big applause for this great panel and the discussion. Thank you very much.